Walter Brennan won 3 Oscars and became America's favorite TV grandfather. But behind his warm smile was a terrifying secret. In the 1960s, he celebrated when civil rights leaders were murdered. He built underground bunkers and kept weapons. Even his own co-workers called him a bigot. He used his trusted voice to record propaganda for extremist groups. The man who played lovable characters was spreading hate and fear. What he did off-screen would shock millions of fans who trusted him. Walter Andrew Brennan was born on July 25, 1894, in Lynn, Massachusetts, at a time when waves of Irish immigrants were arriving in New England. His parents were among the nearly 4 million Irish who had fled poverty and famine. His father was an engineer and inventor whose success was unusual in an era when Irish immigrants still faced open discrimination. The Brennan home was modest and sat less than 2 miles from the wealthy seaside community of Swampscott. Walter grew up surrounded by working-class neighbors, but could see the world of wealth just over the horizon. This early exposure to 2 very different ways of life shaped how he later played characters from all walks of society. At Rindge Technical High School in Cambridge, Brennan followed his father's path at first, excelling in mechanical systems and technical drawing. The school also had a progressive drama program, and despite being known for his engineering talents, he found himself drawn to the stage. His first role was as an elderly man when he was just 16, a choice that foreshadowed his long career playing older characters. His training in mechanics and drafting gave him an analytical way of thinking, and he began to approach acting like solving an engineering problem, breaking down a role into moving parts and figuring out how each piece fit. Classmates called him the Professor because he could calculate lighting angles and sound placement for school plays. When the United States entered World War I, Brennan enlisted in the Army in 1917, joining the 101st Field Artillery Regiment. In late 1918, during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, he was exposed to mustard gas, one of the war's most feared weapons. Over 26,000 Americans were killed in that campaign, and Brennan was left with permanent damage to his vocal cords and lungs. The high, reedy tone of his voice was born from that injury. His fellow soldiers teased him for it, not knowing it would one day help win him 3 Oscars. The experience also left deeper scars. Survivors of mustard gas often battled lifelong respiratory issues and symptoms of what is now recognized as PTSD. After the war, Brennan moved to Guatemala to try his hand at pineapple farming. At first, the venture looked promising. American investors were pouring money into Central American agriculture, hoping for massive returns. His farm sat in rich volcanic soil near the Pacific coast, and the profits in the early years were strong enough that he later joked he couldn't spend the money fast enough. But by 1922, disaster struck. Plant diseases destroyed crops, political unrest shook the country, and a glut of tropical fruit in the U.S. market sent prices crashing. Brennan lost nearly everything and had to work aboard a merchant ship to earn his passage back home. That failure hardened his views on money. In later years, even as one of Hollywood's wealthiest actors, he kept a conservative, cautious approach to finances. By 1925, Brennan had moved to Los Angeles just as the city's real estate market was exploding. He made a fortune buying and selling undeveloped land, benefiting from property values that were sometimes doubling within months. He invested in areas that would later become prime Hollywood real estate. But the good times ended abruptly with the 1929 stock market crash. The real estate bubble burst, and Brennan lost everything. He slept in his car, ate at soup kitchens, and took any work he could find. In 1925, he began working as a film extra, appearing in small roles in films like Webs of Steel, The Calgary Stampede, and Lorraine of the Lions. His war-damaged voice and rugged appearance made him memorable, and director Richard Thorpe used him repeatedly for minor parts. Through the late 1920s and early 1930s, Brennan appeared in more than 20 films some years, working for multiple studios. He performed in westerns, comedies, and even horror films, including an uncredited role in Bride of Frankenstein in 1935. His versatility and work ethic made him one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors, even before audiences knew his name. The turning point came in 1935 with Sam Goldwyn's The Wedding Night, starring Gary Cooper. Brennan had been hired for a tiny, uncredited role as a taxi driver. But his performance caught Goldwyn's eye, and the part was expanded during filming. The expanded role earned him his first screen credit and a long-term contract with Goldwyn. That led to a role in Howard Hawks' Barbary Coast later that year, the film Brennan credited with setting him up in the industry. In 1936, Brennan played Swan Bostrom in Come and Get It, a role that won him the very first Academy Award ever given for Best Supporting Actor. He portrayed Swan across decades of the character's life, from a young man to an aging widower, bringing warmth and depth to a role that could have been a stereotype. The win at age 42 made him a late blooming star and led to leading and co-starring roles in films like Affairs of Cappy Ricks and Wild and Woolly in 1937. In 1938, he was already well known, yet his role as Peter Goodwin in Kentucky almost never happened. He had been working without pause since Christmas of 1937 and was ready to step away. Exhaustion was setting in, but something pulled him back. He learned the rhythms of horse care by working with real thoroughbreds for weeks. That dedication won him his second Oscar in 3 years and pushed 20th Century Fox to chase more horse-themed successes. A year later, Brennan stepped into the ragged shoes of Muff Potter in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. This 1939 version was the first major color adaptation of Twain's novel, and Technicolor makeup made Brennan look even more weathered than usual. It was a role close to home in some ways. He had battled his own struggles with alcohol before fame, and that gave the character's sadness a real weight. Child actor Tommy Kelly admitted Brennan's performance unsettled him on set. Brennan studied Missouri speech patterns to nail the dialect, adding to a portrayal that balanced brokenness with humanity. Then came The Westerner in 1940, and Brennan's third Oscar in just 5 years. As Judge Roy Bean, he built a character from historical accounts of a man who mixed cruelty with a warped sense of justice. Riding, shooting, and studying Bean's real-life court cases consumed his preparation. One infamous scene drew directly from transcripts where Bean fined a dead man for carrying a concealed weapon. Brennan's screen time nearly matched Gary Cooper's, sparking debate over whether he had been placed in the wrong category. His sweep of 3 Best Supporting Actor wins was so dominating that the Academy changed its rules to keep any actor from controlling the category again. By 1941, Brennan was back on screen in Sergeant York, playing Pastor Rosier Pyle. Initially hesitant because of his own complicated feelings about religion after his World War I service, he took the part and shaped it with care. Howard Hawks urged him to tone down his usual quirks for a more grounded Tennessee preacher. He studied with Pentecostal ministers to capture the conviction behind the words. The film became the highest grossing of the year, earning more than $16 million. Though Gary Cooper drew most of the attention, Brennan's role anchored the film's moral heart, earning him another Oscar nomination. In The Pride of the Yankees the next year, Brennan took on a role based on sports writer Paul Gallico. His lifelong passion for baseball fed into his portrayal, and his familiarity with the game's language helped shape the script. He mastered the rapid speech of 1930s sports reporters by listening to game broadcasts and stood on camera alongside legends like Babe Ruth. without losing credibility. Some of his own suggestions about batting records made it into the final cut. The film earned 11 Oscar nominations and a place in the National Film Registry. 2 years later, Brennan joined Bogart and Bacall in To Have and Have Not. Filming began with barely more than 30 pages of script, forcing William Faulkner to write on the fly. Brennan filled the gaps with improvised lines, the most famous being, "Was you ever stung by a dead bee?" All of this happened while a quiet romance between the leads simmered off camera. Through the chaos, Brennan kept the production steady, creating a drunken sailor character that audiences loved. The film ended up as one of the top earners of 1944. By 1946, Brennan had transformed again, this time into Old Man Clanton in My Darling Clementine. Ford staged the OK Corral gunfight based on stories Wyatt Earp had told him, and Brennan's ruthless patriarch gave the film a chilling anchor. There was no comedy here, only a hard, menacing presence that felt rooted in real violence. His work helped make the film a lasting piece of American cinema, later preserved in the National Film Registry. In Red River, 2 years later, Brennan was Nadine Groot, a cook on a massive cattle drive. Surrounded by John Wayne and newcomer Montgomery Clift, he acted as both a mediator on screen and a mentor off it. The film's sweeping journey from Texas to Kansas earned high praise, and Brennan's humor and warmth softened the story's harsher edges. By 1954, he was in The Far Country, one of the rare westerns set in Alaska's gold rush. Playing opposite James Stewart, he portrayed a prospector with both loyalty and greed, a mix that reflected Anthony Mann's evolving approach to the genre. Even in studio-made snowfields, Brennan looked like he had survived decades in the wild. His final great Western role came in Rio Bravo in 1959. At 65, he brought both frailty and grit to Stumpy, the limping deputy devoted to John Wayne's sheriff. His own aging lent the performance a truth that audiences felt. Surrounded by Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, Brennan was the glue holding the mismatched group together. Hawks even extended the film's running time to give their relationships more room to grow. The result was a Western that emphasized loyalty and friendship, closing Brennan's career in the genre on a high note. Walter Brennan's leap from film to television began in 1957, when he stepped into the role of Grandpa McCoy. Over 6 seasons and 224 episodes, he became one of America's most familiar faces. Before this, he had been a reliable supporting actor in movies. After The Real McCoys, he was a household name. The transformation was so complete that he won 3 Emmy Awards for Best Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series, all for this one role. No other actor had done that before. In 1962, Brennan took part in one of the most ambitious movies ever made. How the West Was Won wasn't just a Western, it was a Cinerama spectacle costing MGM more than $15 million. Brennan played Colonel Jeb Hawkins in the Civil War section, standing shoulder to shoulder with names like John Wayne, James Stewart, and Gregory Peck. At 68, he still commanded the screen. Acting for Cinerama was different. The massive curved screen required a special style of performance. Brennan's decades of work, from silent films to Technicolor, meant he adapted with ease. The film went on to earn more than $50 million worldwide, proving that his star power was just as strong in major cinema as it was on television. 2 years later, Brennan tried something closer to home. The Tycoon, which aired from September 15, 1964 to April 27, 1965, ran for 32 episodes. He played Walter Andrews, a millionaire who had to rebuild his fortune from nothing. The role mirrored his own life. In the 1920s, Brennan had made a fortune in real estate only to lose most of it in the market crash. He poured that experience into the character. The pilot, titled Horatio Alger Again, was almost his personal story. Despite good reviews and high production values, the show didn't connect with audiences and became his only real television disappointment. In 1967, Brennan returned to his strongest ground, the Western. The Guns of Will Sonnet ran for 50 episodes and gave television one of its most memorable lines: "No brag, just fact." Brennan played a grandfather searching for his missing gunfighter son. At 73, he was still riding horses and handling guns himself. The series used a slow-burn storytelling style, with the son appearing in only 14 episodes, keeping viewers invested. The finale, in which all three generations became lawmen in the same town, gave audiences a rare and satisfying conclusion. By the early 1970s, Brennan was winding down. His final television appearance came in To Rome with Love, playing an Irish grandfather at 76. In 1970, he was inducted into the Western Performers Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, joining legends like John Wayne and Roy Rogers. By the time of his death on September 21, 1974, at age 80, he had appeared in more than 230 roles. He remains the only male actor to win 3 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor, while also conquering television. His star still sits at 6501 Hollywood Boulevard. Away from the cameras, Brennan's personal life was steady. He married Ruth Caroline Wells on October 17, 1920. Their marriage lasted 54 years until Brennan's death. Ruth supported him through financial collapse and later success, and she lived until 1997, passing away at the age of 99 from emphysema, the same illness that had taken her husband. Brennan also built a lasting family base far from Hollywood. In 1940, he bought the 12,000-acre Lightning Creek Ranch in Oregon for $40,000. He turned it into a full enterprise with a motel, movie theater, and store. The barn alone stretched 212 feet long and 65 feet wide. The ranch ran on gas generators and became his retreat between roles. He often went hunting there with his grandson Mike, though he rarely pulled the trigger himself. Some of his family still live in the area, keeping his presence alive. In the 1960s, Brennan's conservatism shaped his home life in more direct ways. He completely banned his grandchildren from listening to the Beatles, convinced their music was a threat to American morals. This was during the band's peak between 1964 and 1966, and Brennan saw it as part of a larger cultural decline tied to the counterculture movement. His stance was firm, even if it deepened the generational gap in his own family. Faith was another anchor. Brennan was a devoted Roman Catholic and kept daily prayers in his home. He became more public about his beliefs in the 1960s, especially in 1964, when he spoke at Project Prayer in Los Angeles to support school prayer after Supreme Court rulings against it. He saw religion as a vital defense against moral decline, a belief he carried into both his family life and his public voice. Walter Brennan was one of America's most beloved on-screen grandfathers. His voice, his smile, and his gentle manner made him a trusted presence in millions of living rooms. But away from the cameras, he was following a very different path. In the 1960s, he joined the far-right Birch Society, an ultra-conservative group that believed the United States government was already infiltrated by communists. The group's founder even claimed President Eisenhower himself was part of a communist conspiracy. Brennan didn't just quietly support them, he became their finance chairman. Using the same warm Grandpa Amos voice people knew from the real McCoys, he recorded propaganda for the society, spreading warnings about a supposed communist takeover. His fame became a tool, his trusted image a weapon. By 1972, he was so deeply tied to the group that he lent his voice to ads for far-right presidential candidate John Schmitz. Brennan's politics weren't limited to secret meetings. In 1964, he threw his support behind Barry Goldwater's presidential run, praising him for voting against the Civil Rights Act. Goldwater said the law was unconstitutional, but in truth, it was dismantling legal segregation in America. For Brennan, that was exactly why he backed him. He made public appearances, gave speeches, and aligned himself with a movement fighting against racial equality. 4 years later, he dismissed Richard Nixon as too liberal and endorsed George Wallace, a man who built his career defending segregation. It was a shift that showed just how far Brennan had moved toward openly white supremacist politics. He also began framing every major social movement of the 1960s as the work of foreign enemies. To him, civil rights marches, anti-war protests, even urban riots weren't expressions of anger at injustice. They were the result of communist plots. He claimed African Americans would have been perfectly content with segregation if not for agitators stirring them up. The paranoia ran so deep that Brennan built a bunker at home, stocked with food and weapons, expecting a Soviet invasion. On the set of The Guns of Will Sonnet, his co-workers remembered him saying the 1965 Watts riots could have been stopped with a machine gun. It wasn't just rhetoric. That comment was a call for mass killing in response to demands for justice. His views weren't confined to private conversations. In 1965, he recorded a song called "He's Your Uncle, Not Your Dad." It attacked President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty, painting it as a communist plot to make Americans dependent on government instead of family. The timing was cruel. Johnson's programs were lifting millions out of poverty, but Brennan's recording spread through far-right networks, reinforcing the belief that social services were dangerous and un-American. Brennan was equally outspoken in his support for Ronald Reagan's runs for California governor in 1966 and 1970. Reagan campaigned hard against student protesters and the counterculture, promising to clean up the mess at UC Berkeley. Brennan echoed those attacks in interviews, calling protesters beatniks and Marxists, and even accusing Hollywood colleagues like Henry Fonda of being subversives. His language was sharper than most conservative celebrities, always leaning toward conspiracy. Then came the moments that would leave his co-workers stunned. In April 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Brennan reacted on set with open joy. Television editor Stanley Frazen recalled him laughing, dancing, even celebrating. 2 months later, after Robert F. Kennedy was shot, Brennan responded the same way, gleeful, unrestrained. These were not private whispers, but public displays, seen by entire crews. It was as if the deaths of men who fought for civil rights and progressive causes were victories to him. The pattern was clear. To Brennan, the civil rights movement was never about justice. It was, in his mind, a communist operation designed to weaken America. His beliefs let him ignore decades of discrimination and poverty. Instead, he poured his energy into spreading those views through speeches, recordings, and personal conversations. Those who worked closely with him knew the truth. Television writer Everett Greenbaum, who spent years writing for The Real McCoys, called Brennan a bigot who frequently uttered racist remarks. This wasn't an occasional slip. It was who he was. Behind the lovable TV grandfather stood a man convinced the country was under siege, ready to use his fame to spread fear, division, and hate. The gap between the Walter Brennan America adored and the Walter Brennan who lived off-screen was wider than most fans could ever imagine. In the 1960s, at the height of the Cold War, he built a massive underground bunker beneath his Los Angeles estate. This wasn't just a place to store canned goods. It was a fortress. Inside were weapons, medical equipment, and enough food to last his family for months. He believed the Soviet Union was preparing to invade America at any moment, and he wanted to be ready. His children grew up above this hidden shelter, knowing their father spent much of his time stocking shelves and checking supplies. His fears didn't stop at the idea of foreign armies. Brennan believed communists had already infiltrated Hollywood itself. Even John Wayne, the man who embodied American patriotism on screen, wasn't safe from his suspicions. He kept an enemies list of people he thought were part of the conspiracy, and it included names no one expected. In 1965, at a Birch Society convention, Brennan recorded speeches in his Grandpa Amos voice, warning that Hollywood was filled with communist agents. He would test co-stars in subtle ways, asking loaded political questions to see how they answered. To him, disagreement was proof of disloyalty. On film sets, this created tension and mistrust that followed him until the end of his career. To him, their style, humor, and influence were a weapon aimed at America's youth. He believed their popularity was manufactured by communist forces to create generational conflict. He took this so seriously that he checked his grandchildren's music collections, confiscated Beatles records, and even told them not to spend time with fans of the band. His family recalled the uncomfortable tension this created, but Brennan saw it as protecting them from a dangerous form of propaganda. When protests against the Vietnam War spread across the country, Brennan saw them not as expressions of free speech, but as signs of foreign control. In interviews, he claimed these demonstrations were organized by communist agents working directly with Moscow and Beijing. To him, no true American would protest the war unless they had been manipulated. The darkest side of his beliefs emerged in 1968, when he openly celebrated the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, convinced both men were part of the communist plot. These moments revealed how far his paranoia had gone. He no longer saw opponents as people, but as enemies whose deaths were victories. When Brennan died on September 21, 1974, the public image remained untouched. Newspapers called him America's finest character actor, a three-time Academy Award winner who had appeared in more than 230 roles. Hollywood avoided talking about his extremist beliefs. His funeral was a tribute to his charm on screen, not a reckoning with the reality of his private life. Studio executives had long known about his political activities, but they had kept them out of the press, casting him in wholesome roles, even as he recorded speeches attacking civil rights leaders. Decades later, Carl Rollison's 2015 biography finally brought these hidden truths into the open. Using letters, family records, and interviews, Rollison showed how Brennan's marriage to Ruth Wells helped shield his activities from public scrutiny. She didn't just support him, she helped distribute his political recordings and joined him at far-right events. The book forced a new conversation about how much we can separate an actor's work from their personal beliefs. Some theaters stopped showing his films, and film archives began adding warnings about his political extremism. The man Hollywood had once protected was finally being seen in full, his charm and talent forever shadowed by the fears that had ruled his life.